Welcome to GCSE English Unlocked with me, Mrs. Dixon, your guide to mastering AQA English literature and language. Each episode is designed to help you revise with confidence, consolidate key skills and unlock the secrets behind top grade answers. Whether you're tackling Shakespeare, analysing unseen poetry or perfecting your persuasive writing, this podcast will break everything down clearly so you can walk into your exams feeling calm, prepared and in control. So grab your notes, settle in and let's start unlocking your English potential. Today's topic for GCSE English Unlocked is characters from Romeo and Juliet. So we're going to give you an overview of the key characters, quotes and lots of useful information about them that you can use in your exams. Really special guest with me today. His name is Mr. Baker Webber. How are you doing, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Have some great hints and tips for us for Romeo and Juliet. We're going to start with Juliet. What do you think of Juliet, sir?
Juliet's a really interesting character. Obviously one of our titular characters. I think particularly interesting the fact that we don't actually get introduced to her until a bit further into the play. Act 1, Scene 3, I believe. And at the beginning she is submissive, chaste, demure. She is your typical sort of perfect Elizabethan sort of young woman. And she has a really interesting character arc where she really changes, and all three of those sort of descriptors I used to describe her, she ends up sort of defying, becomes sort of rebellious, seeking sort of love and freedom. And I think really interesting character arc.
Yeah, so one of the things, especially with pupils who are going for those grade 7 to 9, we might encourage them to use those words initially and ultimately. Is that something you feel we could use with Juliet?
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it though, obviously it's all... Oh, dear me.
Baker Webber nearly fell off his chair.
It's always interpretive, but I see Juliet as a character that through her romance with Romeo discovers freedom. And we see this sort of idea that she stands on her own two feet. We get the moving from your consent doth give strength to fly, and this idea that actually everything she does is for her parents and all of her sort of decisions are made for her. And then we get this sonnet and an introduction of relationship with Romeo where they share these lines and she's on equal footing to another person. And for me, I think that's personally why I think she ultimately sort of ends her life, because she can't bear the idea of going back to being this sort of submissive woman. The friar gives her the option to be a nun, that he'd hide her away, and that she could live out that life. But she couldn't go back to that sort of more oppressive state that she used to know.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So that, I think something students often struggle with is why. They've known each other a few days, they've known, they barely know each other, they've only just met. Why would you end your life over this person? And I think you make such an interesting point there. And it could allow students to link to context really nicely about returning to the patriarchal society and returning to her oppressive father. So yeah, that could be a lovely route in. I'm not testing your memory, sir, because I'll try and do some as well, but key quotes for Juliet. So I've got one from Lord Capulet. It's about Juliet. It's not said by her, and I think it summarises her nicely at the beginning because of her naivety. And he says she is yet a stranger in the world, reminding us just how young she is, because she's not 14, she's 13 years old. Do you have any favourites, sir?
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of it actually comes in with sort of her, as I say, sort of finding that independence and sort of breaking the mold of what is expected of her. So I look at quotations like, I am sold but not yet enjoyed.
Oh, yeah.
So this idea that there's sort of the implication of, back to that patriarchal idea, the implication of the male-female relationship. She is objectifying herself by describing her as this object that is sold, which we can also tie in later on to her father, who I will give you to my friend. That is the role of a woman. They belong to their father, then they belong to their husband. And she refers to Romeo throughout as Lord, which shows that dynamic that she sees him as this sort of figure that sort of Definitely. Has power over her. But I think interestingly, she still finds that independence because she's chosen to submit to him. And again, with the I am sold but not yet enjoyed, we see that sort of idea of male satisfaction. She isn't looking for enjoyment. She is looking for pleasure. She wants to be enjoyed and sort of bring pleasure to Romeo.
Yeah, and we talked a bit about this actually, so when we did our drama workshop at Beech and Cliff, about who was in, especially the bit with the balcony scene, and who was in control, whether it was Romeo or Juliet, and I think we had differing ideas, if I can recall correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you said, I was just thinking about the point you made about Juliet insisting on, she essentially insists on marriage from Romeo because she'd know the expectations of her day, and that, it'd be a useless, if not detrimental, liaison without it. Swear
not on the inconstant moon. Absolutely. This idea that Romeo is sort of very hyperbolic in his language, and it's all these sort of over-the-top proclamations of love. And Juliet really interestingly takes control and says, no, I'm not interested in that. I want you to take a moment, think about it. If you want to marry me, then do so. And she sends the nurse to go ask her.
I kind of imagine Romeo at this point like cartoon characters when they're in love and they have like their tongue out and heart eyes.
Absolutely.
And he's just kind of willing to go along with what Juliet
whatever
says.
She says. I was going to talk about the proxemics of the scene as well, because I think it's really important we remember that this is a play, not a book. So actually we can talk about things beyond simply just the language choices. And ultimately she is on the balcony and he is down below, which creates a physical separation between them. So there is the barrier of space, which could be reflecting the fact that, their parents don't want them to be together or wouldn't allow them to be together. But you can also interpret it in a couple other ways. So you can talk about the fact that it shows that she is above him, and this idea that actually he idolizes her, he looks up to her, and we see this through the language of saint and shrine in that extended metaphor in the sonnet. It also can be, linking on to that again, this idea of her being closer to heaven, this sort of angelic being that is sort of above all the rest. And we see this language and this sort of motif of sort of Juliet standing out throughout the play. We get jewel in an Ethiop's ear. She is this valuable sort of jewel and gem that shines out against the black sort of backdrop. A dove trooping with crows. She is this pure and innocence and beauty, surrounded by all the other women, Rosaline included, who are just simply this sort of pale imitation. And we get this throughout. But I think what's really interesting, linking back to that, what I was talking about earlier with the idea of Juliet sort of actually expresses sexual desire, we get snow on the back of the raven. It's not word perfect, it's slightly different.
Something like that,
but it's this idea that actually, yes, she appears innocent and she comes across as this pure and pious girl, but actually underneath she still has these sort of sinful desires that wouldn't be expected of a woman of the time. So I think she's a really interesting character.
Favourite Juliet bit is the bit when she finds out Tybalt's been killed.
Oh, yeah,
I love the speech. I think it's awesome. Anyway, something I struggle sometimes to explain to classes, or I guess see as realistic myself, is she says he's she flies off the handle. Romeo's a serpent heart hit by a flowering face. We've got all these amazing oxymorons and contrasts and juxtapositions. He's a damned saint. Oh, I love that. It's brilliant. We see Juliet as a strong-minded character, a naive but determined young woman. Do we not see some flightiness here, do you think? How she suddenly changes from being so betrayed and angry at Romeo to saying that that word banished had slain 10,000 Tybalts.
I think this, is a reflection on the fact that ultimately she is, as you said earlier, but a stranger in the world. She is not an experienced person. She had this view of love and thought that, it was perfect and that Romeo was perfect. And yet sort of that view gets shattered quite quickly. What it says to her love and her feelings to Romeo, that she reconciles it quite so quickly and, immediately banishes Tybalt from her mind, is interesting. But I was thinking about that actually. We get so many language parallels in this text. So she calls Romeo here a dove-feathered raven, which is a perfect mirroring to the quote I said a moment ago about Juliet being snow on the back of a raven. And then actually, I think she sees it that actually both of us have our faults. Both of us sort of, have our darkness. And therefore, actually, is she really able to judge Romeo when she herself has sinful tendencies?
And also I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but we never see Juliet obviously interact with Tybalt in the play.
No.
Like maybe she just is
doing the thing that she thinks she must do, which is to be, to show allegiance with her family members. But maybe Tybalt's just not a very nice guy.
Well, he definitely doesn't come across as a nice guy. That's a fair point. But she does describe him as a dear friend.
Well, and actually, it's really interesting because when he dies, the nurse says that I can't remember the quote exactly. She calls him my best friend, or my bestest. Not my bestest friend. That's definitely not right. Don't read that. She says something. Anyway, she says something along the lines of that Tybalt was her best friend. So I love these little clues that Shakespeare puts in that just leaves you, because you wouldn't put those two together, would you? Okay, me and So just paused it there to double check, and the nurse calls Tybalt the best friend I had. Yeah, so interesting. Tybalt, he's an enigma. He's my favourite character as well, but we'll get onto him later. So we must move on to Romeo now.
Yes, of course.
This is a Shakespearean tragedy, so we must have a tragic hero. If we take a play like Macbeth, his tragic flaw is pretty obvious. It's his ambition. Romeo, I sometimes think it's a little more up for debate. So what would you say was Romeo's hamartia? What's his tragic flaw?
I mean, I've gone backwards and forwards on it, but I think for the last couple of years, I've very much seen his hamartia as his impulsiveness. We get two direct warnings from the friar.
Those are not on fire today, sir. Those stumble who... This was in my previous... episode as well. It was one of my top 10 quotes.
Oh, well, you remembered your top 10 quotes so well.
Those... okay.
My year are shouting at me.
Right.
Have a look.
Anyway, while I'm looking this up, these violent delights have violent ends. That's a really nice one. Sorry, those stumble that run fast. That was fairly obvious. We were just having brain parts. You'll have to forgive us. Those stumble that run fast. Sorry, so go back to what you were saying.
So absolutely, I think it's his impulsiveness, the fact that actually he does really everything without thinking. He decides he's not going to kill Tybalt, the love I bear thee, and villain thou am not. And then immediately, I mean, yes, he does kill Mercutio, but he then goes back on it and kills Tybalt. The fact we go from Rosaline and his deep obsessive love of her to immediately sort of forgetting she exists. Did I see...
Oh, yeah, have I... I never did I see true beauty till this night.
Perfect, there we go.
Can I just ask, sir, now this is something me and Miss Den Hartog were discussing, and it's something that students get confused over, and that's the theme of fate and Romeo. So Romeo has lots of quotes and moments where he becomes entangled with fate. So he says, I'm fortune's fool.
Yes.
And he says, I defy you, stars. And if you've seen the Baz Luhrmann movie, it's this famous bit when Leonardo DiCaprio falls down to his knees and he kind of half cries, half shouts, half bellows, I defy you, stars. So there's this idea, right, in Romeo and Juliet that fate maps out your destiny.
Absolutely. A very astrologically inclined society, the Elizabethans.
Absolutely. Yet, we also criticise Romeo for being impulsive and rash, and Juliet says at the start, I really love this as well, and it's easy to learn, that the love is too like lightning. Despite the warnings of going wisely and slowly and violent delights and violent ends, etc., 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 how much of a role would you say, and sorry, this is like a tough question because me and Mrs. Den Hartog were like, whoa, how much would you say his own choice, his own actions lead to his demise, or was it always going to happen even if he behaved impeccably?
The thing is, ultimately, we're given at the prologue, two star-crossed lovers take their lives. So we are established from before the play has even begun that it will end and is fated that they will die. However, I am, and my students will know this, a massive hater of Romeo. I think he is an awful, awful character. And I put the blame fully on him. I'm Fortune's fool. He is blaming and fate for his actions for killing Tybalt, but ultimately, in my opinion, that's just simply him trying to sort of relinquish responsibility and avoid the guilt of the actions that he's done.
Well, I know, yeah, I definitely don't think he's as interesting, or he doesn't develop as much as Juliet, if at all. But surely his fight with Tybalt, that's, if Tybalt hadn't, we could go on and back and on in this all afternoon, but he sort of tried to appease Tybalt. Or do you think he should have fought him?
No, I think he'd made a very sensible decision when he said, I'm not going to kill you. he decided he wasn't going to vow. As I say, the love I afford thee. He admits I love you because, you know, he is obviously now family and kin to
he loves
to
thee
Tybalt.
more. I love thee more than thou canst devise.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to know that, you know, at the time, the killing of kin, being a kin killer, was sacrilegious. And, you know, if he'd maintained his temper and sort of moved on, you know, the prince would have dealt with Tybalt for having killed Mercutio. Tybalt probably would have been executed. Did Romeo need to get involved? Probably not. But the thing with Romeo, I think more interesting than actually his decisions and all the rest, is the way I've always looked at Romeo is his purpose is as a critique and a warning against sort of idealized and sort of romance, which was really popular at the time. So going really nerdy now, but a type of poetry called Petrarchan poetry, Petrarchan love, was all popular at the time. It was all about idolizing your love and putting her on a pedestal above sort of humanity and above the rest. And we see this throughout with both Romeo, with both Juliet and Rosaline, covered with Mercutio because it's Mercutio's purpose. But the point is, he comes across, he has this whole beginning. He's locked himself away in his bedroom. He's closed the curtains and made an artificial night. He's sulking, he's sullen as a result of the unrequited love and the infatuation he feels for Rosaline, but it's clearly not genuine as he moves on so quickly. And I think there's very much this sort of criticism towards love without substance and this idea of, you know, loving love rather than love itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and actually Juliet says to him when they first kiss at the ball that she says you kiss by the book.
Absolutely.
So it literally feels like Romeo has taught himself to be this, like you say, Petrarchan lover. I was going to say with the balcony scene feels very Petrarchan, with Juliet up, raised above him on a physical level, and Romeo kind of positioning himself down low. He very much fulfills that role, I would say, there. But yeah. Okay, any good sides to Romeo, sir, or are you not a fan?
I mean, I'm really not a fan.
Brave?
Yeah. Well, this is interesting, isn't it? Because I tell you what I do sort of respect, and it's an interesting detail, is the fact that he does take Paris's body into the tomb with him. So Paris at the end of the play tries to defend Juliet's tomb from Romeo. The two fight, and quite quickly Paris dies. But Romeo clearly shows Paris a level of respect by taking his body into the tomb.
And he goes through with it, you know, because I'm thinking, well, you know, he's driven by teenage desires and what have you, but he when he thinks Juliet is dead, in inverted commas, he goes through with the suicide.
He does, yes, absolutely. You know, he puts his money where his mouth is, metaphorically speaking. But equally, my query would be, if he hadn't done that, a few days later, would he find some other girl that he falls hopelessly in love with?
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, maybe we could say his hamartia is his obsession with love.
Yes, that works.
Or his desire to be the perfect lover, or his love of love, possibly.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to have to move on, sir. We're 20 minutes in already, and we could talk all day, I'm sure. But our next one, and I think you touched on this briefly, is Mercutio. He's a funny old character, isn't he?
He is. You know, acronym, his name coming from Mercury, meaning changeable, and chaotic, like the god and also the element. And I was actually discussing this with my students today. And the conclusion we drew together was that he is a foil to Romeo. Romeo is this idealistic lover who wants to be, just as you said, this perfect lover, whereas Mercutio is far more of a realist. He talks about how, in his opinion, if love be rough with you, be rough with love. When Romeo's sulking about Rosaline, he's like, well, if it's getting you down, just sort of, you know, get over it, carry on, fight those feelings and sort of force love. He sees love far more physically. It's a sexual thing, and this is where we come in sort of the double entendre around the pricking of love, and also Romeo wishing to hide his bulbul, and he acts like a natural, which means a fool. And basically what he puts it down to is he says, Romeo, you're acting like an idiot, you're acting like a fool, making a mess of yourself, and the only reason you're doing it is because actually deep down you want to have sex. He doesn't believe for a second that it is this genuine deep love or deep desire. He's far more realistic about sort of intimate relations.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be inclined to say he's the voice of reason in the play to an extent, but then of course I would also say that equally he is quite a reckless character. Yeah,
absolutely. This is especially exemplified in the Tybalt Mercutio Romeo scene. Tybalt arrives looking for Romeo. It is Romeo that he has an issue with after Romeo came to the party unannounced and uninvited. And Tybalt was going to go away, but it's Mercutio that goads him and calls him the Prince of Cats and asks him to dance and staccato, which are all sort of both sort of dancing terms but also fencing terms. So it's actually Mercutio that very much winds Tybalt up. So if Mercutio had acted like Benvolio, who, you know,
the peacekeeper,
benevolent Benvolio, then actually Tybalt and Romeo may never have even fought, and Mercutio potentially wouldn't have died.
Do we think then there's a dark side to Mercutio? Because we've got this really weird bit, and I have to say I'd be surprised if it came up in an exam, but the Queen Mab speech, where he talks about this fairy's midwife, he says, who is responsible for your dreams, and the speech gets quite chaotic and sexual and full of weird abstract images of this little fairy queen putting dreams into people's heads, and in the end Romeo cuts in and says, peace, Mercutio, thou talkest of nothing. And I think I'm a little bit biased by seeing productions of this, but Mercutio gets quite heated, and I think in one of the productions I've seen he actually pins Romeo up against the wall as he's doing his Queen Mab speech. Do we think he's got a dark side?
Yeah, I mean, again, this ultimately is where plays are interesting, because not only do you have the reader interpretation, but you also have the director and you have the actor interpretation as well. I definitely think it can be argued as a dark side, but I see him in that monologue as more mocking Romeo than anything else.
Yeah.
Again, that idea that, you know, there's lots of reference to sort of childish dreams, and this idea that Romeo is acting the fool and being childish.
It's all just a fantasy.
And I also think it's quite interesting. His character, Shakespeare's interesting with the language. So most of the upper classes speak predominantly in iambic pentameter.
Yes.
And then our lower classes, like the nurse and the servants at the beginning, speak in prose. But Mercutio is a rare character where actually he speaks in both, which I think reflects that sort of chaotic nature of him. I think ultimately, for me personally, his purposes are to sort of ground the play somewhat and sort of act as this sort of juxtaposition to Romeo and Romeo's
That not
feelings.
Everyone in Verona thinks that two teenagers marrying after a day is a great idea.
Absolutely.
We need someone who thinks it's bonkers.
He also, you know, sets the stakes and sort of, you know, really is the first domino into the sort of true tragedy of the play.
So I want to talk about the wonderful bit, A Plague on Both Your Houses.
Yes, of course.
Now, this is obviously one of the most sort of emotion-filled moments in the play, I think. So the way I interpret this is that Mercutio feels that he's been caught in the crossfire, if you like, and he's sort of only just realised a minute or two or whatever too late that this feud is pointless, and it all goes back to the ancient grudge, the anonymous grudge that has no root, that no one knows what the meaning is. It's so pointless that it's never even mentioned in the play, where this ancient grudge has resulted from. And Mercutio realises as he's dying that he's got stuck between the Montagues and the Capulets. Now, there's a bit of a misconception about Mercutio. I think that he is a Montague. He's not a Montague. He is an ally of the Montagues. So yes, he's friends with Romeo, but he's not in either house. He doesn't suffer fools gladly, and he doesn't like Tybalt. He doesn't like Tybalt's manner and Tybalt's rudeness. He wants to teach him a lesson, and rather than fighting for this sort of deep-rooted family allegiance, I don't think that's Mercutio's style. I think that's probably something he could see through as well, as the Montague and the Capulet feud. I a plague on both your houses. Like, is this a curse? The plague? Why would he reference that, do you think?
Well, obviously, you know, contextually speaking, the plague and Black Death was still very sort of prevalent. It wasn't that long prior to this that London had a really very serious bout of the plague. So this is something that's going to be in the audience of the time's sort of mind as a really horrible and awful thing to wish on someone. So I think it really does reflect how angry and sort of, you know, wronged Mercutio feels in dying. Absolutely.
But also he must be angry at himself. He's let himself be drawn in.
He has. But, you know, his purpose, I think his purpose of fighting is interesting. Oh, calm and vile, dishonourable submission.
Yes, I love that line.
This idea that actually Romeo's bringing so much shame and so much dishonour to himself as a man and his family by refusing the challenge of a fight. There's such an equation of sort of violence being a masculine trait here that Mercutio feels that for his friend, he has no choice but to step in and fight on Romeo's behalf.
So surely he's just as bad as the Capulets and the Montagues then, if he's putting, you know, honour and pride in.
Absolutely.
It's just centred around a different concept, in this case like masculine ego rather than...
But it is still fighting for very little reason, like actual substance, which again I think is why Benvolio are one sort of benevolent, as I say, and loving young male characters, the only young male to survive the play, as this sort of lesson to the audience that actually this idea of masculine violence, which was so rampant in London times, especially in the theatre district where Shakespeare was writing and working, there were constant brawls and fights.
Well, I mean, it's like the beginning, my naked weapon is out, Samson says. I know we could go into the...
do l'entendre.
Yeah, absolutely. But I said to my class, we should be shocked by the very fact he's walking around with like an unsheathed rapier with a sword, and he's just sort of... I mean, imagine if we saw people today walking about the streets of Yeovil with guns and swords.
And also, it's not just that it was a different time; it was illegal. Only a knight at the time was allowed to be carrying proper swords through towns and cities. They are breaking the law immediately the second they walk onto stage, establishing this sort of male physical and violent culture that is really prevalent in the play. I'm very quickly going to touch on, I think it's interesting we mention the fact that Mercutio isn't part of the Montague family, but he is actually part of a different family. He's related to the prince, as is Paris, and both Paris and Mercutio die as a result of the feud. And therefore we have the prince at the end who reflects that he has lost a brace of kin, a brace being what we refer to as two birds that have been shot for sport, or it would have been arrows back then, tied together. And I've always loved that quotation because there's a reflection that the prince has been weak in the fact his inactions and the fact that he hasn't stopped the feud quicker, and you know he forgave Romeo and gave him banishment when he said I'd give, you know, execution. But also I love this brace of kins because, as I say, pheasants and the like are game animals. They're killed for sport, not for food necessarily, and therefore I think there's this real reflection that all of these deaths have not been for real purpose. They've been done for sport, for this idea of honour and family relations and all the rest. And I think it really highlights the sort of needless violence. Yeah,
and interestingly, there is a bit of foreshadowing because the prince says, your lives will pay the forfeit of the peace. When he tells them all off for brawling at the very start of the play. And indeed, Mercutio fighting in public, Romeo fighting in public, Tybalt fighting in public, and even Paris. So their lives really did pay the forfeit of the peace. I mean, we could go into now, and I would quite like to, because I'm really enjoying this chat, how responsible Aeschylus is for all of this. But I'm just not going to go there because we need to move on to Tybalt and Benvolio. Tybalt and Benvolio, I love them. I just think they're so interesting. So let's talk about Tybalt.
Of course. So Tybalt is really sort of the personification of, you know, masculinity and honour and just this whole culture that Shakespeare is potentially criticising. Everything for him is about power and status. So there's lots of emasculation from him. So Shakespeare has him often call people by boy to sort of belittle them and sort of put himself on this pedestal of man above others.
Boy, this will not excuse. What is it? This will not excuse the injuries thou hast done me.
Absolutely.
I think so. Yeah, one thing I think is interesting about Tybalt is the cat references.
Yes.
So obviously his name Tybalt. I feel like, I don't know why, but that has feline implications to me. Like Tibbles or some kind of Mr. Tibbles.
I've never thought of that. That's interesting.
Now he's also. Mercutio says, I don't want anything but one of your 9 lives, and he calls him the King of Cats.
Yes.
And he also moves in a very precise way, like a cat does as well. So I think there's a deliberate association here with Tybalt and cats. I'm wondering why that is, and I wonder if it's because, so my cat at home, like, blindly kills, and I absolutely can't stand it, birds sometimes. And it is in his nature. I always tell him off, and my husband's like, oh, don't be mean, he can't help it. It's his instinct. So I'm wondering if Shakespeare's trying to say that Tybalt is like, and some young men are sort of hardwired maybe for bloodlust and ego and status. I don't know. That was just that's something that I thought about. What is the purpose of this cat reference? Why is he the King of Cats?
That is a really interesting sort of take. I've never particularly thought on the cats that much, which is weird because it's such a sort of prevalent reference for Tybalt. But I find with Tybalt, he's far more two-dimensional than Romeo, Juliet, and even Mercutio. His whole thing from the very introduction of him is this sort of, desire for violence.
Yes, he's the furious Tybalt. He's referred to the fiery Tybalt. And he actually says, I hate peace.
Yeah.
Like, who hates peace?
Peace, I hate the word, as I hate hell, all Montagues and thee.
I mean, he's a loose cannon, isn't he? He'd be a nightmare on a night out.
Yeah, and in fact, we see this even in the Capulet Ball, where Lord Capulet very much tells Tybalt to stop, and Tybalt ignores him, and Capulet has to get really quite sort of forceful with him.
He will be endured.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that word endure is really interesting because Tybalt says, I'll not endure him. He's literally like, I cannot stand him.
Just to even be in the same space as him.
Yeah, but students always write about Lord Capulet slapping Tybalt round the face. That's just in the film. It doesn't happen in real life. Just note that down. It's like people writing about them going about with guns. They don't.
Yeah, please don't do that. Please don't do that.
But then we've got this weird bit, the best friend I had, an honest gentleman, and then like Juliet's mum, who is Tybalt's sister. No. Tybalt's auntie, Tybalt's auntie, are like devastated and gutted when Tybalt dies. So, but I guess we never see that side of him because, like you say, he is two-dimensional.
I think it implies that there is more to him, but, we don't see that.
So let's then to our other bestie, Benvolio, who sort of goes hand in hand with Tybalt, but is obviously the complete antithesis of Tybalt. So you've talked a bit about how his name links to peace and
yes, as I say, benevolence, which means all loving. And really all of the scenes that he is in, of the younger generation, he is the voice of reason. In the first scene, the big street.
Put up thy sword, I do but keep the peace.
I do but keep the peace, absolutely. He is only using sort of violence and sort of his sword as a means of keeping peace and keeping everything under control. He is not seeking violence. At every sort of turn, he tries to break up the violence. So in the when Tybalt arrives, these hot days, he talks about how the heat will make people violent.
Mad blood stirring.
Mad blood stirring, absolutely. And asks them to sort of step away or walk away, or at the very least go somewhere that isn't public. He very much is this sort of reliable character.
But does he fail at his job? I mean, really, he's quite two-dimensional too. I mean, if anything, even more so, I would say, than Tybalt. But does he fail at his mission to keep the peace?
I mean,
I think that it just shows that the feud is impossible to stop. It has to run its course. It has to blow out. The lessons must be learnt.
Is that then Shakespeare? But does that then mean that Shakespeare's effectively saying that actually there's nothing we can do about the violence on our streets? Let it run its course, and eventually it'll come to an end.
I don't know.
That's quite pessimistic.
Maybe he means that you have to learn your lesson.
Yeah.
I don't know. It is quite pessimistic. But just looking at the time here, so let's go on to these characters worry students. they go, oh my God, what if the nurse comes up? What if Friar Lawrence comes up? Well, you don't need to fear because we've got you. So, Juliet's nurse.
Yeah, so we get, as I'm sure you're aware, this really interesting sort of maternal figure to Juliet, as is Friar a sort of paternal figure to
so
Romeo.
We can talk about them both together, couldn't we?
Absolutely. So they are confidants to both characters. They are people that they sort of share their secrets with and sort of trust, sort of really above all others, definitely above their parents. And we've got to remember that a nurse isn't sort of someone that sort of takes care of injuries. Nurse is someone that sort of does the day-to-day looking after of a child. These aristocratic families. So she would have breastfed Juliet. She'll have, fed her, looked after, put her to bed, all the rest. She has been the sort of maternal figure to Juliet. And we see this in the language. So she calls her ladybird, lamb.
Yeah.
So we get this familiarity, though I do think these quotations are interesting because they have sort of deeper meanings. A lamb obviously is cute, but it's sort of defenseless and often used sacrificially, or at least is hunted by wolves, potentially sort of looking at the sacrificial nature of a daughter being sort of, I will give you to my friend Lord Capulet.
I think, I think there's two sides to her really, because she's this maternal figure and she cares for Juliet. She's deeply devastated when Juliet again dies, in inverted commas. She says, never was so seen a blacker day as this. But there's also this slightly weird and I find quite depressing side to the nurse, in that she tells this weird story early on about Juliet falling over as a little girl, and her husband makes like a sexual joke about it, about Juliet lying on her back or something. And actually a lot of what the nurse says is sexually charged, and it's funny and bawdy, and
absolutely,
I don't think it's intended to be taken too seriously. But I also wonder, something she says that I think is really interesting is when Juliet's parents have a huge go at her and Juliet is refusing to marry, the nurse says, I think it best you marry with the county. So she says, look, you're going to have to marry Paris, like, you've not got a choice. So I almost feel like the nurse is resigned to her kind of drudgery in life, if you like, her woman's drudgery. Juliet's drudgery will be something slightly different. She's not going to be breastfeeding other people's children and sort of looking after them, but it's going to be a sort of dull drudgery, I imagine, where she is sort of hidden away and she can't be who she really is, and she marries someone she doesn't love. I feel like the nurse maybe signifies like the inevitability of that, perhaps. Absolutely.
And also we've got to remember that, unlike the majority of the characters, she isn't noble born. She is essentially a servant to the Capulet household, and therefore, she can't necessarily be as outspoken about her true sort of feelings or desires. She knows her place in the hierarchy, and unfortunately for her and the masses of the time, that is at the bottom, sort of having to do what is told, and she accepts that, you can't change your fate, come back to that word, and therefore is passing on that potential depressing wisdom to Juliet. Yeah,
and she even says, now by my maidenhead at 12 years old, suggesting that, her sort of entire life, I guess, has been dominated by sex and men, and she is assuming perhaps that is how Juliet's life will be, whether she likes it or not. Anyway, let's just finish off by talking about Friar Lawrence. I don't think we're going to have time for the Capulet parents today, but perhaps we could do them another time.
I'll come back.
You'll come back, so we haven't put you off. Good. Friar Lawrence again, bit of a weird one. We want to like him, but a bit odd. So obviously he's like the nurse father figure. He's a holy man, he's called. He's wise, he's sensible to an extent. He says that quote me and Sir couldn't remember. Those that run fast stumble. I don't think that's
not
it. Not
quite right.
Those that
stumble that run fast.
Yeah, they stumble that run fast. That's it. They stumble that run fast. Now, yes, okay, fine, Friar. Violent delights have violent ends. Yes, we know. So why, in God's name, did he think this was a good idea to marry these two kids? Yes, we know he wanted to turn the rancor to pure love, but just seems questionable to me, I think.
I think it's interesting because I think it's quite clear that he doesn't believe that Romeo and Juliet truly love each other. He talks about how men's love clearly lies in their eyes rather than anything else, i.e., Juliet, Romeo's only attracted to Juliet's beauty. And to be fair, that is shown through Romeo's language. Really, all he ever talks about is Juliet's beauty, not sort of any sort of personality characteristics.
He doesn't know them, does
he? But they don't know each other, do they? Absolutely.
It is quite desperate. I just feel really like...
I think he is, in his opinion, whether it's true or not, he doesn't believe that Romeo and Juliet love each other, and therefore he is marrying them for alternative reasons, which is, as you say, to turn Orang to pure love, i.e. to end the feud and sort of unite the houses.
No, I think there's a bit of a... Yeah, so that's what he says, but things get weird, I think, towards the end, because Friar Lawrence, he kind of tries to wriggle out of his responsibility. So he leaves, for a start, he leaves Juliet in the tomb because he doesn't want to get into trouble. And then to the prince as well, he kind of tries to talk himself out of being involved. And again, it's one of those moments which I think don't have an answer. And it's like Tybalt being the honest man and the best friend the nurse ever had. You're like, that's a bit weird.
I mean, ultimately, you could draw it back to the fact that the Elizabethan society is very Protestant. They, don't trust the Catholics, and they see them as sort of politically motivated and power hungry. So potentially, we could see this criticism of the Catholic faith and their meddling within society. But
that's an interesting bit of context, some high level context I think you could get in there. That's great. He's lover of plants.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
So I think he talks about plants. Again, my quotation knowledge is not, it's the end of the week, it's Friday Period 5, by the way, so forgive me, but he talks about how they have both the power to kill and the power to heal, i.e. it can be used as medicine plants or as a poison. We see Romeo using poison later on in the play. And I think this is sort of quite reflective of this sort of love conflict sort of dichotomy, this idea that, causes both huge delight and joy, but also pain and suffering.
Yes. Love moderately.
Absolutely.
Moderately, he says. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so I think we're going to have to call it a day there. When you come back for more, we can do the Capulet parents, although again fairly one-dimensional perhaps, I would say, although Lord Capulet...
I find Lord Capulet very interesting, actually.
Do you find him interesting? Okay, we'll do a psychological analysis of Lord Capulet in the next episode. But thank you so much, sir. I've really enjoyed this discussion, actually. You've given me things to think about that I haven't considered before.
Much the same.
Yes, and some really lovely points. What do you think we should tell our students, like when they're writing about the characters, like what is the most important thing they should do?
Honestly, I think the main thing is not to get caught up on the characters as characters. Think about what is the purpose of this character? What is Shakespeare trying to reveal about life and society? You've got to remember this text is universal. It is still relevant today. We still have sort of toxic masculinity, sadly, rampant around school. And you've got to think about what is he actually trying to challenge or highlight through that character rather than what's the character like themselves.
So use your analytical verbs. Shakespeare exposes, criticises, tears down. So my last question to my guests is always the same. If you were a year 11, Mr. Baker Weber, what advice would you give your former self if you could? I
mean, clearly I haven't learnt this lesson too well, but to rein the ego in. Very egotistical year 11, thought I was brilliant, knew it all better than my teachers, and I was fine for GCSE, but I crashed and burned in my A-levels because I assumed I knew everything.
And your punishment was to become a teacher?
Not a punishment at all, I'm very happy.